Hello friends, thank you for watching this video. Today I want to talk a little bit about mindfulness. And I know mindfulness is talked about a lot, and I don't want to just give you a general definition. I want to be a little bit more vulnerable and talk about how mindfulness has actually helped me in my own life, give you my own personal experiences. And what confused me about mindfulness initially was that I felt like I was hearing two different definitions. The first being that mindfulness is being fully present and engaged in the moment. This is what I believe Ram Dass means when he says be here now, and what Eckhart Tolle teaches in his book, The Power of Now. In Buddhism, sometimes this is called sati. The second definition involves being present but steps back a bit and asks you not just to be fully present in what you're doing, but to be aware and conscious of your thoughts, feelings, and bodily sensations in the present, and to do this without judgment. The question I have is, can you be fully present in the moment, but also fully present and attentive to your body and thoughts all at the same time? For me personally, I don't know if I can practice both definitions of mindfulness simultaneously. I found that to be fully present in the moment, it sort of dissociates me from my body, and it clears my mind of thoughts. But when I observe my thoughts, it sort of dissociates me from the present moment. The best example I can give involves times when I was experiencing some sort of pain in my body. And when I move my awareness to my body, the pain is very present. But if I'm able to shift my awareness to the present moment, I completely forget all about the pain. Now, maybe what I'm experiencing here isn't mindfulness, but rather falling into what they would call a flow state. I'm not really sure. It's hard to tell exactly where the line is between mindfulness and flow state. Another example that comes to mind is when I'm engaged in an activity, say washing the dishes. If I'm fully present in the moment, then I can vividly smell the dish soap and see the complex patterns of the soap bubbles. But if my mind kicks in and I start having thoughts, I found that I can be fully aware and non-judgmental of those thoughts, but then I lose the awareness of the activity. The sound of the water seems to become quieter, and the texture of the sponge becomes less noticeable. For me, I have to be careful not to fall into this trap, this sort of mental multitasking where I'm trying to be fully present in the moment, but also letting my thoughts flow by as I observe without judgment. What I found works best for me is to choose one or the other, to make a conscious choice to either be fully present in the moment or be aware of my surroundings and fully attentive to whatever it is I'm doing, to allow my thoughts to flow and to observe them without judgment. When I first started practicing mindfulness, the first version was not possible for me. I couldn't be aware of the present moment because I could not stop thinking. My mind was just a runaway train carrying everything imaginable, thoughts about the future, memories of the past, replaying conversations in my head. And at that point in my development, I don't think it was possible for me to be fully present unless I was pulled into a flow state by some sort of external stimuli. But the practice of observing my thoughts without judgment was immensely helpful to me. It became like a superpower where I was essentially able to sort of clone myself. There was the me that was having thoughts and the me that was just observing them for what they were and sort of gathering data. It was like changing my perspective from first person to third person. It was like being the actor and the audience at the same time. I think in a way, it's a form of a very complex dissociation, which is why I think I was very good at it. And I say a complex dissociation because you're doing it consciously and willingly, but you're learning to dissociate or separate yourself from your thoughts. Just because you're having a bad thought doesn't mean you need to feel bad. It's just a thought. You can let it go without judgment, right? When I started to practice in this way, I started learning so much about myself. I started to see what kind of thoughts were helpful and what kind were harmful. I started to understand what type of situations provoked a particular thought or feeling. It was so interesting to me because I was having the same thoughts I had. It's the same thoughts I had been having my whole life for years, but I had never stepped back from the thoughts and allowed myself to get a more macro perspective about the thoughts themselves. There's that cheesy quote, I don't know it exactly, but it says something like 90% of success is showing up. And I started to wonder, how often am I actually showing up? An analogy that comes to mind is that the show playing on the TV is not the TV. And I think for much of my own life, I was showing up as the TV show rather than the TV. Whatever was going on in my mind was what I was. For many years, I just didn't understand this, and I don't think we do a good enough job of teaching this to kids, teaching them that they're not their thoughts. I think sometimes we can get stuck in a thought or an emotion because we're so deep in it that we aren't aware that it's happening. For example, if someone does something to you that you feel is uncalled for and it makes you feel agitated, it makes you uncomfortable, suddenly the wheels begin to spin and you examine every single interaction that you've had with this person in the last couple of years. And you try and figure out why this happened without even taking a second to be mindful enough to ask yourself if you want to go down this mental road. You start looking for an objective answer to a subjective problem. Even if you ask this person why they did what they did, sure, they might give you the answer, but that doesn't mean that it's the truth. Maybe they're lying to you. Maybe they're so blind to their own feelings that they're lying to themselves. Maybe they simply just don't remember. I think in life we're the victims and the beneficiaries of the unexplainable. And we have to be able to accept that. I think that mindfulness is one step closer to not needing an explanation for everything. I think it can pave the way to acceptance. I think there's a quote by Eleanor Roosevelt that says, "Today is a gift. That's why we call it the present." And it's so cheesy, but today is a gift. And if you don't live in the moment, then you miss that. Mindfulness is ultimately about being present. And I think when you're fully present, you are fully alive. But for me, before I could accept the gift of the present moment, I had to use mindfulness as the map to get there. I think that when you're new to mindfulness, it will teach you new things about yourself. One of the things it taught me was that I was taking the beliefs that I had been indoctrinated with in childhood into every interaction. And these weren't things that someone sat me down and taught me. They were conclusions I had come to about myself and about how the world worked based on my own limited experience and understanding. I had developed a perspective, and perspectives can be changed, and perspective isn't the truth. By being mindful of my thoughts, I started to see the mental patterns I'd been stuck in. I started to see the unnecessary negativity in my perspective. And these negative mental patterns were like a weight that I was constantly being dragged by. It increased the weight of every interaction because instead of being in the present, there was a piece of me that was using the present to re-experience the past. I think that being mindful can be so natural to some people that they don't understand why we make such a big deal of it. But for others, being mindful can feel almost impossible. It was to me at first. I think mindfulness is essentially difficult if you've experienced any sort of trauma in your life. My own personal mechanism for coping with my trauma has pretty much always been dissociation. And this is not something I knowingly chose. This is something that I think started as a kid, being in an environment where I didn't feel safe, so I just retreated into my mind. So rather than being aware of my surroundings and my feelings, I could just be in my mind. And as someone who's been doing this from a very young age, I think for me it's become a habit that was very hard to break out of, and one that I occasionally still fall into. With all that being said, I don't see myself as any sort of authority figure or expert on mindfulness. I simply know it's something that's helped me, and that's why I want to share this with you today. I think the true beauty of mindfulness is that it doesn't ask you to change, it simply asks you to observe, to be present, not to change yourself, but to change the way you look at things. And when you change the way you look at things, the things you look at change. That's a Wayne Dyer quote that I've always loved. And I know it might sound a bit lofty, it might sound a bit new agey, but there's a concept in quantum mechanics called the observer effect, which I will definitely talk about in a future video, but it involves how the simple act of observing particles changes their behavior. And I think that is what's happening when you start practicing mindfulness. Showing up and being present will change your life for the better. It certainly has for me. Now, if you've actually made it to this part in the video, I cannot thank you enough. If you've enjoyed this video in any way, please give it a like, subscribe to the channel. It really does make a difference. And also, I'd love to hear your perspective on mindfulness and what it has done for you. And if you have any advice for people who may be struggling with practicing mindfulness. Also, if you want to see more of what me and Honey are up to, you can follow us on Instagram. I'll put the link below. She's usually sleeping. But anyway, thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate it. Be mindful, and I'll see you in the next video.